Some places do not feel empty even when no one is there. They feel occupied, as if something has learned the shape of human movement and waits for it to return. In the late 19th century, large sections of southern Louisiana remained untouched, not because men lacked the tools to clear them, but because those places resisted quietly. Swamps where sound died early, where paths never stayed the same twice, where locals warned that once a man stepped too far in, the land began to watch him back. In the year 1893, a small group of loggers entered one of those swamps to cut old-growth cypress. They believed they were alone. They believed the stories were meant to frighten outsiders. They believed that whatever people whispered about the Rougarou belonged to superstition, not reality. They were wrong. What you are about to hear is not a legend and not a campfire story. It is a personal account, a testimony recorded after the fact and never meant for public ears. The kind of story men only tell when they are certain no one will interrupt them. Before we continue, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you want more historical horror told plainly, without theatrics, without exaggeration, and leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. These stories survive because they are passed from one quiet listener to another. My name is Jonah Leclerc, and in the spring of 1893, I worked as a logger in the Louisiana bayou. What followed us into that swamp did not rush. It did not attack right away. It watched us first, and by the time we understood that, it already knew our names. I arrived in southern Louisiana in the early spring of 1893 after the riverboats had begun moving regularly again and the air carried more moisture than wind. I had worked timber camps before, but never this far south, and never in a place where the ground itself seemed unwilling to be mapped. The job came through a mill agent in New Orleans who spoke carefully and paid promptly. That alone should have told me something. He did not embellish the offer. He did not exaggerate the pay. He simply said the cypress stood tall and untouched, and that men were needed who did not ask many questions. There were 7 of us in total, not friends, not strangers either, men who had crossed paths on other jobs and knew how to work without talking much. We gathered on a narrow dock just after sunrise, loading tools, provisions, and canvas into a shallow draft boat that could slip through water most vessels avoided. No one laughed that morning. I noticed that early. As we pushed off from the bank, the town sounds faded quickly. The smell of smoke and tar gave way to wet earth and decaying leaves. The river widened, then narrowed again into darker channels, where trees leaned inward as if listening. Spanish moss hung low, brushing the water like fingers testing its surface. The boatman spoke only once after we left the main river. He told us where he would leave us and when he would return. Then he added that if we were not waiting on the agreed day, he would not come back looking. He said this without menace or humor, just fact. I asked him why. He looked at me for a long moment before answering. Then he said the swamp did not like men who stayed too long. He said some things, learned routines and learned faces. Then he turned away and focused on the water. We reached a small rise of land, barely higher than the surrounding swamp by mid-morning. Old stumps told us others had camped there long ago, though nothing remained of them now. The boatman unloaded our supplies quickly and pushed off again without waiting to see us settled. I watched him disappear between the trees and felt the quiet close in behind him. The silence was not complete. Insects buzzed, birds moved in the canopy, frogs called from unseen places, but there was no distance to the sound. Everything felt close, as if the swamp held noise near rather than letting it travel. We set camp efficiently, 2 tents on raised planks, a cooking area just far enough away to keep smoke from lingering too long, tools stacked carefully, food secured. We worked as men do when they want to finish before thinking too much. By midday, sweat soaked through my shirt and clung to my back. The air felt thick enough to drink. When I stepped away from camp to relieve myself, the trees seemed closer than before, though I knew they had not moved. That was the first time I noticed the feeling of being watched. It was not fear, not yet. It was awareness, the sense that something had registered our arrival and was waiting to see what we would do next. I told myself it was fatigue and heat. I told myself every new place felt strange at first. That afternoon, we marked our first line of cypress, tall trees with straight trunks rising from black water, valuable timber, the kind that justified the journey and the silence. As we worked, I realized something else. Sound behaved differently there. Axes did not echo. Voices carried only a short distance before being swallowed. When someone stopped speaking, the swamp did not respond. No rustle, no shift, no acknowledgement. It was as if the place refused to answer back. That night, as we sat around a small fire and ate in near silence, one of the men mentioned the Rougarou. He said it casually, as if repeating something overheard rather than believed. No one laughed. No one argued either. We went to sleep early, listening to insects and distant water movement, unaware that something beyond the firelight had already begun to measure us. Sleep came slowly that first night, not because of fear, but because the air refused to cool. Even after the sun dropped behind the tree line, the heat clung to the ground and to our skin. Sweat dried, then returned, leaving everything damp and uncomfortable. I lay on my bedroll listening. At first, the swamp sounded alive in a way that felt ordinary. Frogs called in uneven patterns. Insects hummed in a steady drone. Somewhere farther out, water shifted against roots or fallen trunks. These were the sounds of a place continuing without concern for us. Then something changed. I did not notice it all at once. There was no sharp silence or sudden noise. It was more like the swamp began removing sounds one by one. The frogs grew quieter. The insects thinned out until their buzzing felt distant rather than surrounding. The background noise narrowed, as if something were drawing a circle around our camp. I sat up slightly and listened harder. That was when I heard footsteps. They came from beyond the fire, slow and deliberate, heavy enough to register but careful enough to avoid splashing. Each step pressed into wet ground and lifted again without hurry. Whoever or whatever made them did not stumble. It did not rush. I held my breath. The steps stopped, just outside the reach of the firelight. I could not see anything beyond the glow, but I felt the space occupied. The sense of presence pressed in on me, stronger than before. Not watching from a distance now, but standing close enough to judge. I waited for a voice. None came. After several long moments, the footsteps moved again. They circled the camp once, passing behind the tents, skirting the supply crates, and pausing near the cooking area. Then they retreated toward the trees, fading slowly, as if whoever made them wanted us to hear exactly where they were going. No one else stirred. When morning came, pale and heavy with mist, I asked the others if they had heard anything during the night. They shook their heads. One man joked that the swamp probably had animals curious about our food. Another said the heat made strange sounds seem important. Only one man did not speak. His name was Pierre Fontenot. He was older than the rest of us and had worked bayous before. When I pressed him, he told me quietly that animals did not walk in circles and they did not avoid stepping on roots unless they understood where those roots were. We went to work anyway. The second day passed without incident, though I noticed that the forest seemed closer again. Trees that had felt distant the day before now appeared to lean inward. Water reflected less light. Shadows clung longer than they should have. By late afternoon, we found tracks. They crossed one of our marked lines, where the ground was soft and bare. The prints were deep and clear, shaped like large canine feet, but stretched longer than any wolf I had seen. The toes ended in sharp impressions that suggested claws, yet the spacing told a stranger story. They walked in pairs, one print after another, evenly spaced, upright, not the pattern of an animal moving on all fours. Pierre knelt and studied them without speaking. When he stood, his face had gone tight. That night, the footsteps returned. This time, they came closer. I heard them stop near my tent. I heard the canvas shift slightly as if brushed from the outside. A smell drifted in, thick and sour, like wet fur left too long in heat. My hand closed around the knife beside me, though I did not move. A voice spoke then. It said my name. It said it clearly, softly, in a tone that sounded almost familiar. Not shouted, not whispered, spoken the way a man calls to someone he expects to answer. I did not respond. I remembered the boatman. I remembered Pierre's silence. I remembered the tracks. The voice waited. Then it moved away. By morning, one of the men did not wake. His bedroll lay undisturbed. His boots still sat beside it. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no sound anyone could recall hearing. Only the swamp, quiet again, as if satisfied with what it had taken. The man who did not wake was named Lucien Moreau. He had slept less than 10 feet from me, close enough that I should have heard him rise, cough, or shift in the night. Instead, his place lay untouched, as if he had simply decided to stop existing between one breath and the next. We searched the camp first, then the tree line, then the shallow water nearby. There were no broken branches, no disturbed ground, no signs of a struggle. Even the mud seemed reluctant to give us answers. Pierre said nothing while we searched. He watched the trees as if expecting them to move. By mid-morning, we found tracks again. They began just beyond where Lucien's bedroll had been. One set only. Deep impressions pressed into soft ground, leading away from camp toward darker water. They did not circle, they did not hesitate, they moved with certainty. The spacing told the same story as before. Upright movement, deliberate steps. No sign of dragging. Lucien had walked away. That idea unsettled me more than any evidence of force. Men do not leave boots behind when they choose to walk into swamp water. Men do not walk barefoot into places where leeches and snakes wait. One of the younger men suggested Lucien might have been sleepwalking. Pierre looked at him then. His eyes held no anger, only finality. He said sleepwalkers do not leave footprints that deep. The work slowed after that. Axes struck wood with less rhythm. Conversations died quickly. Every man watched his own shadow, then checked the distance to the next. The forest felt tighter, closer than before, as if the trees leaned in to listen when we spoke. That afternoon I noticed something else. One of the marked cypress trees had been stripped of its cloth marker. The fabric lay shredded at the base of the trunk, torn into thin strips rather than pulled loose. The bark beneath showed long, shallow scratches, high enough that a man would have had to reach upward to make them. Pierre saw it too. He told us the Rougarou was not just an animal. He said it did not kill for hunger alone. He said it watched first, learned habits, learned names. Someone laughed then, not because it was funny, but because silence had grown unbearable. That night, no one slept. We kept the fire burning higher than before. Two men stayed awake at all times, rifles across their laps. The swamp did not go quiet this time. Instead, it stayed unnaturally consistent, as if something were careful not to disturb the balance. Near midnight, I heard breathing. It came from just beyond the firelight, slow and deep, steady enough that I could count it. Each inhale drew in the damp air. Each exhale carried that same sour smell I had noticed before. I raised my rifle but did not aim. Pierre placed a hand on my arm and shook his head. His mouth formed a single word. Wait. The breathing circled us, just out of sight. I heard something brush against reeds, something shift its weight. Then a shape moved between two trees, tall and narrow, its outline briefly visible against the lighter fog behind it. I saw shoulders where shoulders should not have been. I saw arms hanging too low. I saw a head held forward rather than upright. Two dull points of red reflected the firelight. They vanished almost immediately. No one fired. When dawn came, the tracks had returned. This time they circled the camp completely, overlapping, confident, as if the thing that made them wanted us to know it had been close enough to touch every corner of our lives. Pierre said we should leave. The others hesitated. The timber was valuable. The contract was binding. Pride weighed heavier than fear for some men. I said nothing, but I already knew. Whatever had taken Louisiana was not finished. It had only begun to sort us. By the fourth day, the camp no longer felt like a place we had built. It felt like a place we were borrowing, and the owner had begun to grow impatient. We kept working, because work gave the mind something to cling to. Harlan, our foreman, insisted we could not abandon the contract. He spoke louder than usual, like volume could replace certainty. He said men did not run from shadows. He said fear made fools of grown men. Pierre did not argue with him anymore. Pierre had moved beyond arguing. He watched and listened, and when he spoke, it was only to warn. That morning we followed the marked line deeper into the cypress, staying close enough to see each other through the hanging moss. The swamp was bright with mist. Water pooled between roots like dark glass. Every sound felt trapped under the canopy. We called out Lucien's name every few minutes. We called like men performing a duty, not like men who expected an answer. The swamp returned nothing but its usual noises, as if it had never heard of him. Around midday, we reached a patch of ground that rose slightly above the water. Cypress knees jutted up like broken bones. We stopped to drink and wipe sweat from our eyes. Harlan checked his notes and muttered about the mill. That was when the voice came. "Help," it said. It was close enough that my shoulders tightened. It did not come from far away. It came from the trees just beyond our line, where the moss hung thick and the shadows stayed dark. One of the men, Jules, lifted his head sharply. His face went pale. He whispered that it sounded like Lucien. "Help," the voice said again. It used the same tone both times. Calm, even, no strain, no fear in it. That was what made it wrong. Men begging for help do not sound like they are reading a word from a page. Pierre stepped forward and placed himself in front of Jules. "Do not answer it," Pierre said. Harlan spat into the mud. He told Pierre to stop filling men's heads with stories. He said if Lucien was alive, we would find him faster by calling back. I opened my mouth to speak, then closed it again. I did not want Harlan's pride turned on me. I did not want Pierre's certainty to become mine out loud. "Help," the voice said again. Farther left now. My stomach turned. It had moved, but I had not heard it move. Water did not splash. Branches did not break. The voice simply relocated like it belonged to the swamp itself. Jules took a step off the marked line before anyone could stop him. He moved like a man sleepwalking, eyes fixed ahead, drawn forward by something he recognized. Pierre grabbed his arm hard enough that Jules stumbled. Jules yanked free with sudden anger and shouted that Pierre was trying to let Lucien die. Pierre did not raise his voice. He told Jules that whatever was calling was not Lucien anymore. He told him the swamp could mimic what men wanted to hear. He told him that some things used voices the way hunters used bait. Harlan ordered us to keep moving. We walked again, tighter now, every man watching the next, rifles shifting in nervous hands. The voice stopped calling. That silence felt like pressure. Not long after, we found fresh marks on the trees. 3 of our cloth flags had been torn down and twisted around a cypress knee like a crude knot. The bark above them showed long scratches, shallow but wide, as if claws had dragged across the wood. Pierre stared at the scratches and said the Rougarou was testing our rules. He said it wanted to see who would step off the line first. He said it wanted to see who would answer a voice. We returned to camp before the sun fell, and the clearing looked wrong again. The food crate had been opened, not smashed, not broken, but opened. The lid sat neatly to the side, as if someone had taken time. A sack of flour had been dragged out and ripped, spreading white powder across the damp ground. In that powder, the tracks were perfect. Upright prints circled the tents, crossed between our bedrolls, and stopped near the fire pit. The distance between the steps was steady. The weight behind each impression was heavy. The shape of each foot was wrong, too long, too narrow, with claws that pressed deep. The Rougarou had walked among us while we slept, and it had done it without waking a single man. Pierre looked at Harlan and spoke with a quiet finality that made even Harlan hesitate. "It knows us now," Pierre said. "It can call us. It can enter. It can wait." That night, we did not talk about leaving. We talked about who would take first watch and who would be awake when the voice returned. And in my chest, beneath the fear, something colder began to settle. The understanding that the Rougarou was not trying to scare us away. It was trying to choose. That night, the fire burned higher than it had any right to. We fed it until the flames snapped and climbed, until sparks lifted into the branches like tiny warnings. The light still stopped short of the tree line, as if darkness waited there with patience. We set watches in pairs. Pierre insisted on it. Harlan agreed, but only after he walked the perimeter twice with his axe in hand, pretending the motion was confidence instead of fear. No one said Lucien's name. No one said Rougarou again either. The word felt too loud, like it might travel. I took the first watch with Pierre. We sat on overturned crates with rifles across our knees, staring into the same gaps between cypress trunks until our eyes began to invent shapes. The swamp made its usual noises, but they felt staged now, like a curtain of sound meant to disguise movement behind it. Pierre kept his face turned slightly toward the dark, not toward me. After a long silence, I asked him how he knew so much. He did not answer right away. When he finally spoke, his voice stayed low, careful. He said his mother had been born in a house where the old stories were treated like weather, not believed for entertainment, but respected because ignoring them brought consequences. He said the Rougarou was not a single thing in every story. Sometimes it was a man under a curse. Sometimes it was a beast. Sometimes it was something older that used the idea of a beast to keep people away from places that should remain untouched. Then he told me the part that mattered. He said it did not rush because it did not need to. It wanted mistakes. It wanted the moment when a man stopped thinking and started reacting. I looked past the fire into the trees and tried to imagine a creature patient enough to learn names, patient enough to circle us for days. Pierre leaned closer and spoke as if he were confessing something. "It already chose one of us," he said. I asked him who. He did not look at me. He just said the chosen man was the one who kept listening for voices. My stomach tightened because I knew he meant Jules. The second watch took over near midnight. Pierre and I tried to rest, but rest did not come. I lay on my bedroll staring at the inside of the tent, watching the canvas shift slightly with the breeze. Every time a branch creaked, my body tensed. Every time insects dipped into silence for a moment, my heart started running. I heard Jules outside before I saw him. He was whispering, not praying, not talking to us. Whispering to the dark, like a man trying to convince himself he was not afraid. I pushed out of the tent and saw him standing at the edge of firelight, rifle held loosely at his side. His eyes were fixed on the tree line. I called his name softly. He flinched, then turned. He tried to smile, but it failed. He said he thought he heard Lucien again. He said the voice was closer tonight. He said it sounded tired. Pierre came up behind me and told Jules to sit down by the fire and drink water. Jules shook his head. He said he needed to listen because if it was Lucien, ignoring him would be murder. Pierre stepped closer. Pierre's tone did not change, but something in his posture did. He told Jules that if he left the circle of light, he would not come back. Jules' face hardened. He said Pierre was afraid of shadows. He said Pierre wanted an excuse to quit the job. He said the Rougarou was a story told to keep men obedient. Then the voice spoke again. "Jules," it said his name once, from beyond the trees. It was not shouted. It was spoken with confidence, like the speaker knew Jules would answer. Jules's head turned toward it as if pulled by a string. Pierre reached for him. Jules stepped away. I moved forward too, but my feet felt heavy, like the ground held them. Jules raised his rifle slightly, not aiming, just holding it like a man who believed a tool could solve any problem. He took one step toward the dark. Pierre lunged and caught his sleeve. Jules swung his arm free with a sharp motion, not violent enough to strike, but violent enough to break contact. "Help," the voice said, and this time it sounded like Lucien. It had the same rhythm, the same slight drawl, the same weariness that used to settle into Lucien's voice after a long day of cutting. My skin went cold. Pierre's jaw tightened. He did not chase Jules. He did not yell. He simply said, loud enough for all of us to hear, that if any man left the light, we would not follow. Jules looked back once. His face was caught between pride and fear, and pride won by a narrow margin. He stepped into the trees. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then there was a splash, heavy and close, like something large stepping into water. Jules let out a short sound, not a scream, more like a breath knocked out of him. The swamp went quiet all at once. The fire crackled loudly in the sudden emptiness of sound. I raised my rifle and aimed into the darkness, but I could not see him. Pierre lifted his hand and stopped me from firing. "Do not shoot blind," he whispered. "It wants you to waste your bullets." We waited. We listened. No voice called back. No footsteps returned. Only the insects resumed, slowly, cautiously, as if the swamp itself had been holding its breath. When morning came, Jules's bedroll was empty, and in the flower near the fire, a single set of upright tracks led from the camp straight into the trees. By morning, no one argued anymore. Harlan stood over Jules's empty bedroll with his axe hanging loose at his side, as if the weight of it had suddenly become pointless. Henri, our cook, muttered prayers under his breath while stirring coffee that tasted like burnt tin. Two of the others avoided looking at the tree line entirely, as if eye contact might invite something back. Pierre crouched beside the flower, where the tracks were clearest. He studied the impressions the way a man studies a wound, not to admire it, but to understand what it meant. I watched him and asked what he saw. He said the Rougarou wanted us to know it could enter. He said it wanted us to know it could take a man without a chase, without a fight, without noise. He said the lesson was not just fear, the lesson was control. Harlan finally spoke. His voice sounded hoarse, as if he had not slept at all. He said we would look for Jules. He said a camp did not leave its men behind. He said he would not return to the mill with fewer hands and no explanation. Pierre did not raise his voice. He simply told Harlan that if we went searching, the Rougarou would use the search to split us. Harlan ignored him. We moved out in a tight group, rifles ready, tools left behind. The idea was to follow the tracks, to move fast, to bring Jules back if he was alive. None of us believed that, not truly. But men need a reason to move, even when the reason is a lie. The tracks led away from camp through a stretch of shallow water and thick reeds. They remained clear for a time, then vanished as the ground turned firmer and the mud stopped holding shape. That felt deliberate. It felt like the swamp had taken the evidence back. We called Jules' name anyway. We called until our voices sounded thin and exhausted. The swamp returned nothing. The farther we went, the more the air seemed to press down. Heat wrapped around our necks. Mosquitoes drifted in clouds, and still the quiet felt wrong. It was the quiet of a place where something listens more than it speaks. After nearly an hour, we reached a section of trees where the moss hung heavier than anywhere else. The light dimmed there even though the sun was high. Shadows clung to the water's surface and did not break when ripples passed through them. Henri stopped walking. He pointed with a shaking hand toward a cypress trunk ahead. At first I saw nothing. Then I noticed the mark. A strip of red cloth, one of our camp ties, hung from a branch higher than a man could easily reach. It was tied neatly, not snagged. The knot looked intentional, like someone wanted it displayed. Harlan muttered that Jules must have done it. Pierre shook his head once. He said Jules would not waste time tying cloth while he was being hunted. We moved closer, and that was when the smell hit. Sour fur, wet hide, a heavy animal stench that sat in the back of the throat and refused to leave. It was stronger than before, thick enough that my eyes watered. I swallowed hard and forced myself to keep breathing through it. Then the voice spoke again. Jonah. It said my name. It did not come from behind us. It came from ahead, through the moss and trunks, as if the swamp itself had learned to speak. My body locked up, my hands tightened on the rifle. Pierre moved slightly in front of me, like a shield. "Do not answer," he said. I nodded, though my throat felt too tight for sound. The voice came again, a little softer. Jonah. This time it sounded close enough that it should have belonged to a man standing within the trees. Then I saw movement, not fast, not sudden, just a shift in darkness where darkness should have remained still. Between two trunks, far enough away that the firelight of camp could never reach, a shape leaned forward slightly. The outline was wrong. It was too tall, too narrow at the waist. The shoulders looked hunched, as if the spine did not sit correctly. The arms hung too long and did not swing the way human arms swing when a man balances his weight. It held still, watching. I could not see details, but I felt the certainty of eyes. Then the eyes reflected. Two dull red points, like embers behind wet glass, lit up just long enough for my mind to register them, not glowing like lanterns, not shining like a cat, reflecting, as if something inside the skull caught the light and returned it. Henri made a sound like a sob. One of the men behind me lifted his rifle too quickly. The barrel shook. His breath came fast. Pierre hissed at him to lower it. The shape did not charge. It did not growl. It simply leaned back slightly, as if satisfied it had been seen, then disappeared behind the trunk without sound. No splash. no branch crack, no leaves rustling. It vanished the way a thought vanishes when you try to hold it too long. We stood frozen for a moment. Then Harlan said we would return to camp, not because he believed Pierre and not because he believed in the Rougarou, but because he had finally understood something simpler. We were not hunting in that swamp. We were being guided. As we turned back, the insects resumed their drone, and the frogs called again, but the sound did not comfort me. It felt like a mask placed over something breathing just beyond our hearing. Halfway back, Pierre walked close to me and spoke quietly. "It is teaching you your name is not yours anymore," he said. "It can use it whenever it wants." When we reached camp, the fire had burned low, and beside the ashes, placed neatly where we would see it, lay Jules' rifle. It was clean, it was dry, and it was loaded. Jules' rifle lying by the ashes changed something in us. It was not proof. Proof would have been blood or torn cloth, or a body dragged into view. This was worse than proof. This was intention, a message delivered with care. The Rougarou had taken Jules, carried the rifle away, and then returned it clean and ready, as if it wanted to show us that it could touch our tools and decide what mattered. Harlan stared at the rifle for a long time without bending to pick it up. His face looked older than it had the day before. When he finally lifted it, he checked the barrel and the chamber, as if he expected to find mud or water, something that would let him pretend this had a simple explanation. There was nothing. Henri refused to eat that night. He sat near the fire with his hands clasped, whispering prayers, eyes wide and fixed on the dark. One of the other men, Raymond, kept pacing the perimeter until Pierre snapped at him to stop walking alone. Pierre told us we needed rules. He said the Rougarou was testing our habits and breaking them one by one. He said we needed to become difficult to predict. Harlan scoffed, but he did not argue much. His certainty had thinned to something brittle. Pierre laid out the rules anyway. No one left the clearing after sundown. No one walked beyond the firelight alone, even in daylight. No one answered a voice from the trees, no matter what it sounded like. If anyone heard their name, they said it out loud to the group and did not turn toward the sound. That last one sat heavy in my chest. It meant admitting fear openly. It meant confessing that the swamp could call us. We agreed because we had no better plan. As dusk approached, the air thickened again. The humidity turned the skin slick. The light faded behind the cypress line in slow, reluctant steps, and the clearing shrank into a smaller world of fire and shadow. We took watch in pairs. Pierre insisted on changing the pattern. Instead of 2 steady shifts, he wanted shorter ones. He wanted men to rotate so the Rougarou could not settle into a routine. It sounded sensible. It sounded like something a man would say when he believed the enemy listened and learned. I took a late watch with Raymond. Raymond was younger than me and built like a man who had not yet learned how fragile strength could be. His hands shook when he held the rifle, but his voice stayed hard, like he could bully fear into submission. For a long time, nothing happened. The swamp sang its usual night song. Frogs, insects, water shifting somewhere beyond sight. Then the insects began to thin again. Not all at once, one by one, like lanterns going out in a distant town. Raymond noticed it too. His breathing changed. The rifle rose slightly, though he still did not aim. I stared into the tree line and tried to keep my eyes from fixing on any single shadow. When you stare too long in one place, the mind starts inventing edges, and the invented edges begin to move. A branch snapped. It was close, too close to belong to a random animal. It sounded like weight, not accident. Raymond turned his head toward it before I could stop him. Pierre's rule flashed through my mind. Do not turn toward the sound. Raymond did not move his feet, but his attention shifted, and I felt it like a door cracking open. Something answered. Not a growl, not a howl, a soft laugh. It came from the trees, low and controlled, like breath shaped into mockery. It sounded almost human, and that made the hairs along my arms rise. Raymond whispered a curse and tightened his grip on the rifle. Then the voice spoke again, and this time it used Raymond's name. Raymond. The syllables were clean, calm, confident. No strain, no need to repeat. Raymond's mouth opened as if to answer. I reached out and grabbed his forearm hard. My fingers dug into his sleeve. I did not speak loudly, because loudness felt like feeding something. I told him no, and I told him to look at me, not at the trees. He did, but his eyes were glassy, fixed somewhere beyond my face. Raymond, the voice said again, closer. I smelled the sour fur before I saw anything. It drifted into the clearing like smoke, heavy, wet, stale. It filled my nose and coated the back of my throat. Raymond swallowed hard. Something shifted at the edge of firelight, not fully into view, just enough to let us see the outline of a shoulder and the curve of a head that did not sit like a man's head should. The movement was slow, deliberate, as if it wanted us to see that it was stepping close by choice. 2 dull points of red reflected again. Raymond jerked backward, his boots scraping dirt. I held his arm tighter. The shape leaned forward slightly, as if it could smell our fear the way we could smell its fur. Then it did something worse than approaching. It It stopped. It simply stood there, just outside the light, perfectly still, as if it had all night. Raymond started trembling so hard that the rifle barrel shook. Pierre appeared beside us without warning. He moved like a man who had been awake longer than anyone. He stared into the darkness and raised his own rifle, not aiming to shoot, but aiming to hold the line. "Do not fire," Pierre whispered. "Do not give it noise. Do not give it celebration." The shape remained still for a long moment. Then it backed away, slow and smooth, retreating into the trees without sound. No splash, no branches, no leaves. It faded the way it had before, like something that did not need the world to move around it. Raymond sagged against me, breathing hard. Pierre did not lower his rifle. He spoke quietly, and his voice held the kind of certainty that comes from seeing a pattern repeat. "It is not hunting like an animal," he said. "It is hunting like a man. And now it knows which one of us is closest to breaking." After that night, no one trusted silence anymore. Silence had become a signal, not an absence. When the swamp went quiet, we paid attention. When it stayed loud, we paid attention. Every sound felt intentional now, like part of a pattern we were only beginning to understand. Pierre insisted we move camp routines again. He said the Rougarou had already learned too much. He said repetition was invitation. Harlan argued half-heartedly, but his heart was no longer in it. He followed Pierre's lead because doing nothing felt worse. We shifted the fire pit closer to the center of the clearing. We rearranged the tents. We changed who slept where. We even moved the supply crates, though none of us believed that mattered. The movements were small, but they gave us something to do besides wait. Waiting was the worst part. That afternoon, Raymond stayed close to me. The bravado he had worn like armor was gone. He spoke softly now, and flinched at sudden sounds. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the way fear had eaten into his thoughts until there was no room for rest. Pierre watched him carefully. He told me quietly that the Rougarou did not take the strongest first. It took the one whose fear started leaking into behavior, the one who began checking the dark more than the work, the one whose mind drifted toward voices even when no one spoke. I did not ask him if he thought Raymond was next. That night, the swamp did something new. It gave us normalcy. The insects stayed loud. The frogs kept calling. The water moved with small, steady sounds. No footsteps circled the camp. No voices called from the trees. No smell drifted in on the breeze. The absence of threat felt wrong. We took our watches, rotating as planned. The fire burned steady. Men spoke in low voices. For the first time since Jules disappeared, someone even laughed quietly at a remark that would not have been funny a week earlier. Pierre did not laugh. He sat with his back straight and his eyes scanning, as if he expected the calm to crack open at any moment. During my watch, Raymond asked me if I thought the Rougarou could leave. He asked if maybe it had decided we were not worth the trouble. His voice carried hope, and that frightened me more than fear had. I told him I did not know. Not long after midnight, I heard Pierre speak my name softly from behind me. He told me to listen. At first, I heard nothing unusual. Then, beneath the insect noise, I noticed something subtle, a rhythm that did not belong to the swamp, a slow shift of weight, not footsteps exactly, more like a body settling and rising again. It was close. Pierre leaned in and whispered that it was waiting for us to relax. He said predators did not waste energy when prey was alert. They waited until vigilance turned into fatigue. Raymond shifted beside me. I felt it before I saw it. The firelight bent strangely near the tree line, as if something tall had stepped between the flames and the trunks without fully entering the light. The smell came next, faint at first, then heavier, sour fur, wet hide, the same scent that now lived in my memory. The shape appeared again, just an outline. It stood farther back this time, not testing the boundary, not calling names. It simply watched. Then it did something deliberate. It stepped sideways. As it moved, something emerged from behind the tree where it had been standing. A second shape, lower, closer to the ground. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what I was seeing. Then I understood. The Rougarou was not alone, or it was pretending not to be. The second shape moved like a man on all fours, awkward and wrong, dragging itself forward with jerking motions. It made small sounds, breathy and uneven, like someone injured. "Help," it whispered. The voice sounded like Raymond. Raymond gasped. Pierre reacted instantly. He grabbed Raymond's shoulder and pulled him backward. He told him not to look. He told him to keep his eyes on the fire. Raymond screamed that it was him. He screamed that something was mocking him. His voice broke apart into panic, and that was the moment the Rougarou had been waiting for. The shape in the trees straightened. The second shape vanished into the darkness, as if it had never existed. The taller outline leaned forward, closer than it had ever been before, and from just beyond the firelight, the Rougarou spoke in a voice that did not belong to any of us. "You changed the rules," it said. The words were slow and careful, shaped with intention. "Now you see what happens when you do." Raymond bolted. He tore free from Pierre's grip and ran straight into the dark, screaming his own name as if it might anchor him. None of us followed. We heard him splash once, then nothing. The insects stopped. The fire cracked loudly in the sudden quiet. Pierre stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes locked on the place where Raymond had disappeared. He spoke without looking at us. It wanted one rule broken, he said. Just one, and it got it. Raymond did not scream again. That silence pressed harder than any sound the swamp had made so far. It stretched long enough that my thoughts began to race ahead of reason, imagining movement where there was none, imagining hands where there was only dark water and reeds. Pierre was the first to move. He did not run. He walked to the edge of the firelight and stopped, as if an invisible line had been drawn in the dirt. He stared into the trees where Raymond had vanished, listening with a stillness that felt practiced. Harlan took a step forward behind him. Pierre raised one hand and stopped him without turning. "Around. If you cross that line," Pierre said quietly, "it will not take you fast." That was enough. Harlan froze. His jaw tightened, and for the first time since we arrived, he nodded without argument. We waited. Minutes passed, then more. The swamp did not give Raymond back. It did not even acknowledge that he had been there. The insects resumed slowly, cautiously, like a crowd returning after a disturbance. When dawn came, it arrived without relief. We searched the edge of the clearing in daylight, careful not to spread out. We found no blood, no torn clothing, no dropped tools, just one thing: Raymond's footprints. They led from the firelight into the trees, deep and frantic at first, then calmer, longer strides, more measured spacing. Then, halfway toward the water, the prints changed. They began to overlap. One set became two, then one again. The second set was larger, deeper, more deliberate. At a certain point, only the larger prints continued. Pierre crouched and studied the ground. He did not need to explain what it meant. We all saw it. Raymond had not been dragged. He had walked. That understanding settled into us slowly, like rot seeping into wood. Harlan finally said what none of us wanted to admit. He said we were leaving. He said no contract was worth this. He said the mill could argue with him later. No one objected. We packed quickly, but not carelessly. Pierre insisted on order. Panic, he said, was what the Rougarou counted on. He said disorder made men predictable. As we worked, the swamp felt closer than ever. The trees leaned inward. The water reflected less sky. Every sound seemed too near, as if distance had collapsed. When the camp was nearly broken down, something new happened. The voice returned, not calling names this time, talking. "You are leaving early," it said. The words came from multiple directions at once, layered and calm, like echoes that did not need walls. Harlan dropped a crate. It cracked open on the ground, spilling tools. Pierre did not react outwardly. He only tightened his grip on his rifle. The voice continued. "You did not finish your work." I felt my stomach twist. The voice was no longer imitating us. It was speaking for itself now. Harlan shouted into the trees, demanding it show itself. His voice carried anger and desperation in equal measure. The swamp answered with movement. Across the clearing, between two cypress trunks, the Rougarou stepped fully into view for the first time. It did not rush. It stood upright, taller than any man there, its posture slightly hunched but balanced. Its limbs were long and lean, built for reach rather than bulk. Its fur clung in dark, wet patches, and its chest rose and fell with slow, controlled breaths. The head was wrong. The muzzle was elongated but not fully animal. The eyes sat forward, focused, intelligent. They reflected the daylight faintly, dull red against the gray air. It looked at us one by one, not scanning, choosing. When it spoke again, the sound came from deep within its chest. "You learned faster than most," it said. Pierre raised his rifle but did not fire. "We are leaving," Pierre said. The Rougarou tilted its head slightly, as if considering this. "Some leave," it said. "Some stay." It took one slow step forward. Every instinct in my body screamed to run, but I stayed where I was. Pierre stayed. Even Harlan stayed. The Rougarou stopped again, just short of the firelight, and smiled. The expression did not belong on its face. It was not a snarl. It was not a threat. It was satisfaction. Then it stepped back into the trees and vanished as silently as it had appeared. The swamp resumed its sounds. We did not wait another second. We shouldered our packs and moved as a single line toward the river path, knowing with a certainty that burned in my chest that it was not finished with us yet. It had simply decided to let us walk first. We did not speak as we left the clearing. Speech felt dangerous now, like noise that could be counted and followed. We moved in a tight line, Pierre in front, Harlan behind him. The rest of us pressed close enough that I could feel breath and sweat and fear moving between bodies. The swamp did not resist our departure. That should have warned us. The path toward the river had been marked days earlier, a narrow route cut through reeds and shallow water. In daylight it had looked manageable. Now, with the air heavy and the ground slick, it felt like a corridor designed to slow us. Pierre set the pace. He did not rush. He said running invited separation, and separation was how the Rougarou chose. Behind us, The clearing disappeared faster than it should have. Trees closed in. Moss brushed our shoulders. Water crept higher around our boots. Then the sounds began. Not close, not distant, measured. Something moved parallel to us through the trees. I heard it shift weight, then pause. Each time we stepped, it answered with its own movement, matching us without effort. Harlan whispered that it was following. Pierre did not answer. He already knew. The smell returned, stronger than ever. It clung to the air like rot and damp fur left too long in heat. It made my eyes burn and my stomach tighten. Every breath felt like drawing something into myself that did not belong there. We reached a stretch where the water rose to our knees. Progress slowed. Mud pulled at our boots and refused to let go easily. I stumbled once and felt hands grab my arms immediately, steadying me before I could fall. No one let go until I was upright again. That was when the voice came back, not ahead of us, behind. "You forgot something," it said. I felt my spine lock. The voice sounded calm, almost conversational. It did not need to shout. It did not need to hurry. Pierre stopped walking. We all stopped with him. "Do not turn," Pierre said quietly. The voice continued. "You left your work unfinished. You left your names behind." The water behind us rippled once, heavy and deliberate. Harlan clenched his axe. His knuckles went white. He whispered that he would not be followed like prey. Pierre told him that prey ran. We walked. We moved again, forcing our legs through mud that felt thicker by the step. The path narrowed. Reeds pressed in from both sides, their edges sharp against skin. The movement behind us quickened slightly. Not a chase, a reminder. At one point, I heard a second set of footsteps ahead. My heart lurched. I thought it had circled us. Then I saw the tracks. They were fresh, upright, deep. They crossed our path and vanished into the trees. Pierre stopped and crouched. "It ran ahead of us," he said. "It wants to decide where this ends." We pushed on. The swamp grew darker even though the sun was still high. The canopy thickened, swallowing light. Shadows pooled in places where water should have reflected brightness. Then Henri faltered. He slowed, breath coming ragged. His face had gone pale beneath the sweat. He whispered that his legs were giving out. Pierre moved back beside him, put an arm around his shoulders, and told him to lean his weight forward. He told him to keep moving no matter what he heard. Henri nodded, but his eyes kept flicking toward the trees. That was when the voice changed. It spoke in Henri's own voice. "I cannot walk," it said. Henri froze. Pierre cursed under his breath and tightened his grip. The voice repeated itself, closer now, layered with Henri's cadence and fear. "I cannot walk." Henri sobbed once, a broken sound that came from deep in his chest. He tried to pull away, toward the sound, toward himself. Pierre held him. I stepped in and took Henri's other side. We dragged him forward, step by step, while the voice followed, repeating his words back to him with cruel patience. Then suddenly, the voice stopped. The movement behind us stopped too. The silence was immediate and total. Pierre whispered that this was worse. Ahead, the trees opened slightly. We could smell the river. Relief surged through me so fast it nearly dropped me to my knees. Then the Rougarou stepped out of the trees in front of us, not blocking the path entirely, just enough. It stood between us and the river, head tilted, chest rising slow and steady, its eyes fixed on Henri. "You are tired," it said. Henri collapsed. Pierre raised his rifle. The Rougarou smiled again. And in that moment, I understood something with terrible clarity. It was not chasing us away from the swamp. It was herding us toward a choice. Henri lay in the mud at our feet, chest heaving, eyes wide and unfocused. His body had simply shut down, as if fear and exhaustion had finally reached an agreement to stop him where he stood. The river lay somewhere beyond the trees ahead. I could hear it now, slow and steady, close enough to taste freedom. The Rougarou did not move. It stood just inside the shadow of the cypress trunks, tall and patient, its posture relaxed in a way that made my skin crawl. It did not bare its teeth. It did not raise its voice. It watched us the way a man watches a problem he already knows the solution to. Pierre kept his rifle trained on its chest, but his finger did not tighten. I could see the conflict in him. He understood something the rest of us were only beginning to grasp. This was not a fight it wanted. It wanted a decision. "You are heavy now," the Rougarou said, its voice low and even. "You slow the others," Henri whimpered. He tried to speak, but only a broken sound came out. His hands clawed weakly at the mud, as if the ground itself might pull him forward. Harlan took a step toward the Rougarou and shouted that it would not take another man. His voice shook despite the force he tried to put into it. The Rougarou turned its head toward Harlan slowly, deliberately. "I have already taken more than you planned to give," it said. The words landed with a weight that made my stomach drop. This was not negotiation. This was accounting. Pierre spoke then, his voice steady but strained. "We leave together," he said, "or we do not leave at all." The Rougarou regarded him for a long moment. Its eyes flicked from Pierre to me, then to Harlan, then back to Henri, who lay trembling between us like an offering we had not agreed to place. "That is not how this works," it said. Behind us, the swamp shifted. I heard movement closer than before, heavy steps in shallow water, not circling now, approaching, cutting off the space we had already passed through. My throat tightened. It had planned this. Pierre lowered his rifle slightly and spoke without looking away from the creature. "If you wanted us dead, you would have done it already," he said. "You want something else?" The Rougarou's mouth opened slightly, not in a snarl, in something like a smile. "I want what the swamp always wants," it said. "Balance." Henri sobbed again, louder this time. He clutched at Pierre's sleeve and begged him not to leave him. His words tumbled over each other, desperate and broken. Pierre closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he did something none of us expected. He stepped forward, not toward the Rougarou, but toward the space beside it, toward the trees, toward the darkness it had come from. "I will go," Pierre said. "Let them pass." The Rougarou tilted its head, interested. Harlan shouted Pierre's name and grabbed at him, but Pierre shook free. His face was calm now, almost peaceful, like a man who had finally found the shape of the problem he had been circling. "It does not want all of us," Pierre said. "It never did. It wants the one who understands the rules." The Rougarou stepped aside slightly, not enough to clear the path entirely, just enough. The river breeze reached us then, cool against my sweat-soaked skin. The smell of open water cut through the rot and damp fur like a promise. Pierre turned and looked at me. "Take them," he said. "Do not look back." I wanted to argue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do anything other than obey him. But the swamp behind us shifted again, closer now, tighter. Henri was lifted between us. Harlan moved first, dragging him forward. I followed, every step feeling like betrayal. As we passed the Rougarou, it leaned down toward Pierre. "You learned well," it said. Pierre did not answer. I did not look back until we reached the riverbank. When I did, Pierre was gone. The Rougarou stood alone at the edge of the trees, watching us disappear, its red eyes steady and unblinking. Then it turned and walked back into the swamp, carrying the silence with it. We reached the river in pieces, not physically, but in the way men arrive somewhere after leaving parts of themselves behind. The bank was slick with mud and roots, the water moving slow and dark, but to us it looked like open ground after a siege. The trees thinned just enough to let light breathe again. The air felt different there, less heavy, less owned. Henri collapsed the moment his boots hit firmer soil. He lay on his side, gasping, his hands still clenched, as if holding onto something invisible. Harlan dropped beside him, shouting his name, shaking his shoulders, desperate to make sure he was still alive. He was. That felt like a small mercy in a place that had offered none. I stood at the edge of the bank and stared back at the tree line. My body expected pursuit, my ears strained for the sound of water breaking under heavy steps, for breath that did not belong to a man. Nothing came. The swamp stayed still. That frightened me more than if it had followed. We waited longer than necessary before moving again. No one said it out loud, but all of us were listening for Pierre's voice, for his calm instruction, for the certainty he had carried like a weapon. It did not come. We built a crude raft from fallen branches and rope pulled from our packs. The work gave our hands something to do while our minds refused to settle. When we pushed off, the current took us gently, as if the river itself had been waiting. As the swamp slid away behind us, I felt a weight lift from my chest, but it did not leave completely. It shifted. It settled somewhere deeper. Harlan finally spoke as the trees receded. He said we would tell the mill nothing. He said contracts and timber did not matter now. He said the sheriff would laugh at us if we tried to explain. Henri said nothing. He stared at the water with empty eyes, his lips moving silently. I knew then that even if we reached civilization, not all of us would truly leave the swamp. We traveled for hours before seeing signs of settlement. A dock, a shed, smoke rising thin and gray against the sky. When we stepped onto dry ground again, my legs shook so badly I had to sit. A man asked us what had happened. Harlan opened his mouth, then closed it again. I spoke instead. I said we had lost men. I said the swamp was not safe. I said there were places where work should not be forced. The man frowned and nodded politely, already deciding what parts of my words he would forget. That night in a borrowed room, I lay awake listening to normal sounds, footsteps in hallways, voices drifting through thin walls, laughter somewhere down the street. It all felt unreal. When sleep finally came, it brought dreams of standing water and trees that leaned too close. I heard my name spoken in voices that belonged to no one I knew. I woke soaked in sweat, my heart racing. In the morning, Henri was gone. His bed was empty. His boots were missing. There were no tracks, no signs of struggle, just absence. Harlan wanted to search. I stopped him. I told him that the Rougarou did not need the swamp anymore. It had learned turned us. We left town that same day. We did not travel together after that. Men who survive something like that rarely stay close. We scatter, hoping distance will thin memory. Years passed. I tried to live quietly. I avoided swamps. I avoided places where sound carried poorly. I avoided speaking my own name aloud when I was alone. Sometimes, late at night, I would hear footsteps outside my door, slow, measured, familiar. They never entered. Not yet. I am an old man now. The world has changed in ways I could not have imagined. In the year 1893, roads cut through places that once resisted them. Lights reach farther into the night. Maps have filled in the blank spaces we used to fear, but not all of them. Some places remain quiet in the same way that swamp was quiet. Not empty, not dead, just patient. I did not tell this story for many years. I carried it like a debt, something owed but never collected. Men do not like to admit that the land can choose, that some places decide who belongs and who does not. Pierre believed that. He understood the rules before the rest of us knew there were rules at all. I still dream of him sometimes. In the dreams, he is not afraid. He stands at the edge of firelight and listens, calm and focused, like a man doing his job. The Rougarou never touches him in those dreams. It only watches. I wake from those dreams with the sense that something is still keeping count. I have lived carefully since then. I do not wander alone at night. I do not follow voices that call my name from places I cannot see. I do not return to the bayou. But there are nights when the air changes. Nights when insects go quiet all at once. Nights when footsteps sound on ground that should not hold them. Nights when I smell wet fur carried on a breeze that should not reach my door. On those nights, I stay very still, because I learned something in that swamp that no book will teach you. The Rougarou does not hunt everyone. It hunts those who forget where they are, those who believe work and ownership give them permission to ignore warnings, those who think leaving means being forgiven. It lets some of us go, not out of mercy, but because it had already taken what it needed. Balance. If you ever find yourself in a place that feels like it is watching you back, leave. Do not argue. Do not test it. Do not answer when it speaks in a voice you recognize. And if you hear your name spoken from the dark, remember this. Some things learn it so they can keep it. Before you go, if this account held your attention, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. These stories survive because they are shared, not because they are believed. And leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. Just remember, not every place wants to be known, and not everything that follows you wants you to come back alive. Some of them only want to be remembered, and some of them already remember you.